Welcome to the Continuous Delivery Podcast. My name is Zarar.
I'm Hino.
And joining us today is a special guest who makes his second appearance on the podcast. I remember Steve was our first guest way back when, right before COVID hit. And we did an in-person podcast together. So Steve is the author of the book Flow Engineering: From Value Stream Mapping to Effective Action, which he has written with Andrew Davis. And we're going to talk about a bunch of things. Hino and I will basically be interrogating Steve for the next 45 minutes or so. Grilling him, yeah, on what this book is about and why we should pay $42 for it on Amazon. So it's got to be worth it, Steve. So Hino, so Steve, welcome to the podcast, first of all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Very pleased to be back. I'm very big fan of the podcast, even before you guys amassed the giant library that you have now.
So thank you. Why don't we start off with, because in pre-pod we talked about a couple of things to talk about. So why don't we start off with your question for Steve?
Yeah, the first thing that I want to know, Steve, is what made you write this book? There's quite a few books out there about value stream mapping and about dealing with teams and organizations. So what made you write this specific book?
Andrew did. The short answer is Andrew did. I wrote a mini ebook version of this a long time ago, probably 2018. And it was an effort to kind of share what had worked for me in my role as a CTO and my role as a consultant working with different companies, and sort of developing a program on top of value stream mapping, because I found that I couldn't just dive into value stream mapping, right? It needed, first of all, kind of a on-ramp, and then it needed a way to translate into what we're calling in the book effective action, but essentially things that happen as a result of what you discover when you're mapping. And Andrew and I met at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in 2020, and at a open space or a lean coffee about value stream mapping, and he asked me, what book would you recommend? And I recommended Karen Martin's book. Karen wrote the foreword for us in Flow Engineering, which we're very grateful for. But the perspective there is broader than our context in just knowledge work. She covers manufacturing. There is a more traditional context for value stream mapping and value stream management there. And we wanted something very minimal, very easy to start, very easy to understand, that reached folks who were familiar with continuous delivery and lean and DevOps, but were kind of struggling to implement something like value stream mapping. Like, everybody knows, oh yeah, of course we should be value stream mapping, but nobody does it. So we're kind of targeting that problem, that this is something that everybody wants to do and nobody does, or people struggle to do it.
Yeah. So specifically, you wanted to make it more accessible for people in the software engineering industry, it sounds like it. Did I get that right?
That's correct. Yeah. And hopefully in adjacent spaces of knowledge work. We've heard of people applying this in internal audit, in marketing and content creation, event planning. These are all flows of work in organizations. So part of the effort was really to try to unify that as well, say that every workflow is, somewhat similar. It's got value delivery as its ultimate goal, and there's a series of activities that happen to do that. And so we can apply a lot of these lean interventions and models and principles to improving not only flows of work inside of software delivery, but that's our context. Yep. But we see this working well in all kinds of different environments as well.
So I've every time I've pitched a team to do value stream mapping, I almost have never been met with any sort of resistance, because it just makes too much sense to sort of understand how you work together and what the different processes are that bind the value together, or what's needed. So it's almost everybody has an aha moment in value stream mapping. Go, oh my God, we're spending 6 hours waiting for a build. Oh my God, we're spending 4 days waiting for a dependency. And you get this like value stream map, which shows you kind of like all these metrics about like how long things take, who the people are involved. And then you're like, great, we got it. Like it's completely visualized. It's much more transparent now. And then we sort of struggle to come up with particular actions emanating from that map. And that's a very common problem that I personally have experienced as recently as a couple of months ago. So can you talk a little bit about what people who have done a value stream map, have that nice little mural in front of them, what they can take out by reading your book or taking some of the lessons from your book? I know you've done a couple of YouTube videos which go into more detail. So what can they expect to learn both from reading the book, and how can they expect actions to come out of their value stream map? You can feel free to go into detail, but kind of focus more on how do you actually create actions out of that beautiful value stream map?
Yeah, I mean, this is really the core of what we were trying to do to solve this problem of, why folks aren't doing this, because there's limited value in just seeing what's wrong in a value stream or seeing a bunch of opportunities. That doesn't necessarily mean that anything's going to be done to address them. And we know this from retrospectives. Like, how many times have we been in a retrospective where everyone's like, all right, we'll try better next time. And that's not it's not a plan of action. It's not a mechanism that's going to implement any improvement on a sustained basis. It's not building it into your operating model or anything like that. So, with that experience and that knowledge of what happens when people come together and they realize wonderful things and they have this sense of unified clarity, but it doesn't necessarily manifest itself in delivered change or, efforts even in that direction. And, one of the big learnings for me was that this starts before you actually even begin mapping a value stream. For me, mapping the outcome, so doing discovery on what is floating around in our landscape. What are the goals? What are the pains? What are all these things that, we have in our minds as a group who may not work together on a daily basis, right? A value stream can stretch well beyond a team. So you have this kind of siloed information that's locked up and not necessarily surfaced on a regular basis or ever. And so starting from that standpoint of, we don't really know where we are and the direction we should head, to clarifying that into some kind of target. Like, we want to be releasing every 2 weeks, or we want more valuable feedback from customers, or, we want fewer production defects. These are much more concrete targets that we can use to kind of catalyze the effort in mapping a value stream and narrow the scope, so we don't have to be mapping everything. A lot of what happens with value stream mapping is it's very intensive, detailed activity that can kind of burn people out, and they get to the end and they're like, oh, I'm glad that's done. Like, let's go back to work. Like, that was great, but I feel like I just ran a marathon and I want to go back to my real life, or, I want to go sit on the couch. So that doesn't necessarily get you to acting on the insights. So we wanted to keep it very lean and minimal so that you only really dig where you see opportunity. And part of that also is, once you map a value stream, oftentimes, especially in the team context, you have these dependencies that are beyond your control. So let's say you discover a constraint, you discover some kind of impact on the performance of the value stream, and that's over in a silo in the organization that is under completely different mandate than you, different incentives, different leadership. What do you do in that case? And so we spend a considerable amount of time trying to illustrate how we can invite those folks in, share the map as a way of starting a dialogue and co-creating a new iteration of a map where it doesn't feel like you're my problem and I need you to not be my problem. More like, what is a win-win scenario based on the target outcome that we have, which in some cases needs to be elevated so that it's valuable enough to both participants or both areas of the organization. And so, it really is this mechanism for having these better conversations about what's holding us back, but in an inclusive way of bringing those people in. The dependency aspect, I think, is something that we really struggle with on a regular basis. And you can find a lot in a value stream that results in throwing your hands up if you don't acknowledge the fact that the dependency is often beyond your control.
Mm-hmm.
And so we include dependency mapping there as a way of bringing those folks together and having a productive conversation about what's within your control, what's within my control, how can we together create a win-win scenario. And then the final pieces are really co-creating a future state that is better for everybody, with very specific interventions that then get plotted onto a roadmap, along with what I think are really important aspects of a roadmap, measures of progress. So how are we going to know that this experiment or this action is actually moving in the right direction or paying off? How are we going to know that it's done? And then ownership of that progress. So someone who's going to lead it and make sure that it keeps going beyond the mapping exercise or beyond the next sprint to shepherd that forward. So I think there's a lot of pieces there that contribute to the difference between that was great, back to the status quo, and all right, we know what we're going to do. We know who's going to lead it. We know that, we have a plan that's going to be informing our decisions. And we also have relevant time horizons for everything so that we don't have to try to do everything at once, but we're also, creating artifacts that we can share with these other groups that we have to collaborate with, or maybe we have to put something in front of leadership to get their buy-in. And the maps can serve as artifacts to have those discussions and kind of present that value to different people who weren't maybe necessarily part of the mapping itself.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of moving pieces there, but there's a lot involved in kind of going beyond knowing what you can do and actually taking steps in those directions.
What you're describing there, Steve, just going to summarize it, not in with as many words as you used, but just starting from an objective that you really want to achieve, then looking at the smaller piece that is relevant to achieve that objective, then trying to get some measurable action in order to improve that. Sounds like continuous delivery applied to value stream mapping, quite frankly, right? So starting with a small piece where you can actually make a difference, learning from that, moving forward, starting to collaborate with many more, and so forth. That is exactly what you're doing. Does that sound right? Or
yeah, there's nothing new here, right? In what we're presenting, we leverage a lot of the Toyota improvement kata as well, as a framework.
Yeah. We
use lean principles in the book. We didn't come up with our own principles or models for how any of this works. We really are relying on, the prior art that's in these different areas. They all overlap to a large extent. We're trying to kind of sit in the middle of that Venn overlap and say, we can put all of these concepts and models and practices to work in this, I think, relatively new substrate of collaborative mapping, right? Which is something that, is increasingly part of the portfolio for a lot of teams. But, there's a lot of blank slates out there, and there's a lot of templates out there. And, we're hoping to kind of provide theory and practice as well as clear steps that folks can follow.
Yeah, I definitely thought it was quite helpful for people who are in that exact position where they don't know what to do with a value stream map and whatnot. So a couple of questions. So I want to get to the team level stuff in a bit, but in your talks, you put a real emphasis on ownership. you really believe that, like you can come up with all kinds of great ideas, but without an individual owner, I think you mentioned that a couple times, things just will go haywire. And then you said a few times that, like if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. If everybody owns it, nobody owns it. And can you tell me like how you sort of balance that? I need an owner for this particular improvement item, while at the same time, like balancing the idea of self-organization where a team is responsible for organizing. How did you arrive at that? How did you resolve that tension between one person is the owner to, hey, a Scrum is supposed to be a self-organizing team? Like like talk through a little bit about that tension.
Yeah, I mean, I think that on its face, it may seem conflicting, but I think as long as the ownership is invitational rather than inflicted, like as long as the ownership is voluntary and there's a sense of someone's going to represent this or look out for it so that there is a single point of contact. We always, hope to have a backup for all those people so that it's not just a single point of failure also. But that person also has some support and somebody that they're collaborating with directly. But, it's very difficult to coordinate when you have multiple leads of anything, right? I mean, it's difficult to get decisions made. It's time consuming. It can be confusing. It can be disorienting for folks. So yeah, I'm a big fan of kind of voluntary ownership for those purposes so that we're not duplicating everything everywhere and that people, have clear channels to direct information and where they expect decisions and they can expect decisions to be made by someone who won't be standing out of the way saying after you, no after you, no after you. I think that ownership is very powerful for that.
So it's interesting. You tied it back to sort of decision velocity. Mm-hmm. So you found it that decisions get made quicker when you have owners. And I also love the idea of this. I know it sounds simple, and as you said, like there's nothing like new here, but it sort of puts it together in a very implementable way where sometimes you just kind of dump one person as the owner and kind of leave it to them. But I love the idea of like the concept of a backup owner. Yeah. Where the person is there's somebody else holding the person accountable to what they committed to. So definitely dig the idea. As simple as it sounds, I can see why it's so powerful.
Yeah, it looks like ownership does not necessarily mean that the rest does not co-own the action as well, right? That seems to be something that you really clearly call out, that they're working with support. They're not doing this all by themselves in isolation, right?
Yeah, I mean, the other side of the coin, we have these two sides of the coin that are enabling and governing, right? At any given time, you can be kind of supporting and cultivating some kind of behavior or outcome that you want to see, but you're also restricting things that you don't want to see and minimizing things that you don't want to see. I see ownership the same way, right? It's both an enabling constraint and a governing constraint. And certainly a backup is the same way, right? A backup is holding someone accountable. It's also supporting, right? It's also making sure that person can, lead and own to the best of their ability and provide an outside perspective of, have you considered this? Or, I noticed that you seem a little overwhelmed. Is there anything that I can help with, right? So I think that it is both things. It's not just holding someone accountable, although that is very powerful. But, part of voluntary ownership is self-accountability, right? You gain this increased ability to hold yourself accountable when you say, yes, I will do this.
It's like you applied the pair programming to ownership, to tying it back to XP, sort of. You kind of, I felt you went there a little bit.
There's one other piece that folks might be interested in. It's not in the book. It's actually a bonus map that we thought was beyond scope because we had very limited page count. But capability mapping was one thing that I started doing very, very early on in flow engineering. And it's really about what are the critical capabilities that are connected to our constraints in the value stream. And a very important aspect of that mapping is who owns this today, who's backing that person up, and then what are the resources that they have available to support their efforts. And what we find is, when we have these constraints and these areas of concern in the value stream, there's no ownership, much less a backup, much less, dedicated resources or any awareness of what is enabling that capability to be delivered. And, you can very quickly see, okay, well, this is why we have a problem, right? We have all these conditions that are suboptimal, and often it's just a case of surfacing this and having a conversation that kind of resolves this, because people very quickly see, oh yeah, I'll be the lead for that, and someone volunteers to support that, and it all happens very quickly once it's visible. But the main problem is that there's a lack of visibility.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a few. I have lots of questions, but if you're going to jump in on something,
no, go ahead, please.
So I found that at the end of a value stream map, sometimes you come up with an end goal that is very idealistic. Deployments is a good example, because that's often when you go into new org, you kind of try to increase their deployment frequency a little bit. And then you go, well, we want to go to 5 deploys a day, but our value stream right now has 3 weeks. I found that capability mapping sort of helped you not throw up your hands in defeat and because oh my God, how do we go from a month to multiple times a day? Why even bother? There's that end of the spectrum. And the other end is we're just very idealistic on what we can do. So I found that the capability exercise that you have really helped come up with a reasonable set of goals, which everybody could agree with. Not too idealistic, but also considering the constraints of the organization while also pushing on those constraints.
Yeah, while keeping the momentum going, right?
Yeah.
There's one aspect of, early on in what we call flow road mapping, getting everything on a roadmap, where we take all these insights that we've kind of collected through mapping, and there's actions, there's probes, there's experiments, there's this variety of things that we kind of aspire to. But then we do these passes where we kind of stack rank these things, assess their feasibility versus their impact, and that plotting is combined with dependencies, so that we can acknowledge the fact that, we want to do this, but before we can do this, we have to walk before we can run to this thing. So we can link these things, and then that has an impact on where we plot them on a time horizon. So we may love to jump into this right now, but it's got to be next, because we have a dependency that needs to be satisfied first. So dependency kind of manifests itself all through the book and this kind of practice, because it's a very broad sense of dependency. Dependency really is it's prerequisite, but it's also tethering and coupling and codependency. There's lots of senses that dependency kind of manifests itself in organizations. And so that was very interesting. I learned a lot trying to kind of explain all this in different contexts, because, when we think about dependencies and we think about the things that hold us back from improvement, we're commonly just identifying one sense of that word. And that might be different for 8 people across 8 different silos in an organization. So trying to understand this from different perspectives and then be able to speak to that and those differences, I find very valuable.
So those different dependencies that you're talking about, different types of dependencies. Dependencies typically are the one thing that hold flow back, right? That slow it down, if you will. Do you find that there's one type of dependency that really stands out and has more impact than others, or is it really spread across the board?
Well, I think that the moment that you have an external team that is along your critical path, right? Your critical path to production, or your value stream. That is often an extremely challenging condition that I think it is kind of underappreciated, right? Because that group undoubtedly has different incentives than you. They have their own roadmap. They have their own workload. They have not only you as a customer, which may not even be acknowledged, right? The fact that we're all each other's customers in this network of value streams. And there could be a very naturally adversarial relationship there by design, right? Like the system could be actually built out so that these people are not incentivized to cooperate. And that's very difficult. It can be very humbling experience to encounter when you need something from another group and they're actually incentivized to not fulfill your requirement. And that can be anything from a separate incentive, but it can be something as innocuous as an SLA, right? Like if I have an SLA for response as a external dependency, I'm kind of incentivized to maximize my usage of that SLA, right? To give myself breathing room, to make sure that, we all know that if you come in under budget, your budget gets cut. So the faster you are in responding in certain scenarios, especially in organizations that are a little bit less generative than we'd like them to be, you can have very adverse consequences of dependencies, especially outside of teams.
And this is where you say, and in order to now have a couple of ideas on how to solve that problem, buy the book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it all starts with conversation, right? One of the first things in the DevOps movement that kind of started to shift the adoption of these techniques was like, go have a coffee with that person and find out what they do on a regular basis and what's important to them. And so, I see the mapping as really just a level above and beyond basic conversation, much, much more powerful, right? And something that achieves a level of unity and understanding that goes well beyond a conversation, also persists, also shareable, also easy to reference. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff, again, it exists all over the place in different ways. We really just try to bring it together in something that people can follow.
I think the question that someone might ask is that, okay, I already do value stream mapping. Why do I need flow engineering? Like, what's the delta? What's the additional thing that I'm gaining by adopting these practices? And I totally agree with you. A lot of what you talk about is a blend of a lot of different frameworks, because as you were speaking, my mind went to impact mapping when you were talking about setting goals, identifying stakeholders. There's a blend of story mapping, a blend of value stream mapping. You talked about now, next, later, which is another framework. So you've kind of brought these together into like one sort of cohesive way to, think through how to actually execute on things. So I definitely think that's a value add that people can benefit from. So just a little bit on. So just some advice to Scrum Masters, because a lot of people that listen to this podcast are kind of sort of like in the trenches, and they might be listening, okay, value stream mapping, oh, well, now what, one thing that before I want to ask you, what can Scrum Masters learn from this and apply to their software development squads or teams? So at that, 2 pizza team level rather than at the highest level. And I also want to say one thing that I forgot to mention earlier is that I think this technique really has a vector where it introduces a sense of empathy for people, because value stream mapping is very data driven, and it sort of ends at X hours, 4 hours. It doesn't necessarily ask the deeper questions of why that process exists or what the incentives behind it are. It kind of stops short of that. You take it a step further and drill down into the details, and sort of, your coffee chat is a good one. You go, why do you have to get sign off from 4 different people? What's the reason behind it? You dive into that, which I think Scrum Masters can definitely benefit. So I stole that point from you, but tell us other reasons why Scrum Masters or people who are like leading teams, maybe at the product owner or at the team level, what they can get out of this book.
Well, I think, to your earlier question, like, I'm already doing value stream mapping, why should I read this book? I think that, I've always had a very unorthodox approach to value stream mapping because I learned about it briefly in university and discarded it immediately. And then I sort of reinvented the wheel to put it into practice in a context where, I was just kind of following the lead. And so I've kind of created an understanding of value stream mapping from the ground up kind of organically. And I think that might be refreshing to folks. It's also very minimal as opposed to a lot of common value stream mapping practices. So, I think that there is, and also if you understand, it doesn't mean that you can effectively teach it to other people. So if you're trying to scale your understanding of value stream mapping or implement it more broadly in an organization, being able to say, like, don't take my word for it, there's a book, you can just follow the book. That I find very valuable and helpful. Like I lent out my copy of Continuous Delivery. I'll never see it back. I've lent it to so many people now. It's probably in Europe right now. But I find that very helpful. So in terms of, at the team level, these individual roles and perspectives, I think that it does many things. It can help a team kind of learn by doing together. So some of these concepts that haven't taken hold, or even things that you've struggled to kind of have land in a team, you can kind of go through these mapping exercises and kind of get to them by doing the mapping, learn things about flow, learn things about constraints, learn things about data. This is not a very data-driven practice. This is a human conversational practice predominantly, right? A visual exercise, not driven by data. And so it can help these folks kind of better relate to the different roles within their own team. The roles are also silos, right? Specialization is a siloing factor in organizations, right? A front-end developer and a back-end developer can have wildly different perspectives. And so the mapping can bring those perspectives together and help surface kind of weak signals or strong signals in a team and bring them closer together through something that's a little bit more consequential than just a team building exercise, right? I mean, you're actually talking about the work that you do, and you're actually diagnosing challenges in the work that you do, which I think is really consequential, and makes it easier for these folks who are maybe skeptical to participate in an exercise like that without answering the question, what's in it for me? You can connect that directly to, this is going to eliminate friction. We're going to get rid of waste. We're all going to benefit from improving flow. And so the hard sell to the seasoned, pessimistic engineer in the group who, just wants everyone to get out of their way, there's something in it for them, right? You're able to say, this is going to make, this is going to reduce the number of meetings that you've got to drag yourself to. There's any number of benefits. And I think that's really, really powerful.
Yeah. So I think I have one more question for you, Steve. This was wonderful. I'm really looking forward to reading the book and to get more of those actionable insights that you talked about. And I know you from the past as well, so I know that it's going to be a pleasant read, and I'm going to learn a lot from it. But I have one more question for you. Whenever you build something, you make something that is complete, after the fact, you always realize, well, there was this one thing that I wish I would have added. What would that one thing be that you wish you would have added that didn't end up making it into the book? Or maybe you have no regrets at all, right? Which is possible too.
Oh, I have so many regrets, it's so there's certainly a lot of research that I would love to have scoured more deeply and included. We really tried to back up everything that I had kind of experienced personally, and Andrew had experienced personally, and then we've heard from experts and practitioners, and we consumed a lot of experience to kind of reinforce what we were saying, to basically test the idea, like, how do we know that this is good advice? That's another reason why we're building on the body of knowledge that we all know, right? Is that we didn't want to have to build a case from scratch, but there's always more depth, and there's more things that we could actually call out to. We do, we do a limited job saying, if you're interested in throughput and deep measurement of value stream performance, go read Principles of Product Development Flow, right? Go read the Poppendykes. There's a lot of things that we kind of point to. Go look at Worley mapping, because Worley mapping is, a very consequential way to map capabilities in a value chain, which has direct implications on mapping value streams. Things like customer journey, like go read Marty Kagan's work and think about customer journey and how that is fulfilled by value streams. But a lot of the stuff that we couldn't include in the book, or that we missed in the book, was cut intentionally just to keep the page count down. We wrote a lot. I mean, cybernetics is something we haven't got into. I think the industry and the knowledge work industry has a lot that we can learn from cybernetics. We represent a very basic implementation of cybernetics to kind of reinforce our preference for working backwards, setting a target outcome, and then working backwards to put that into place. I could go on for days. It hurts my heart to think of all the things that can't go in the book, but if you want people to read anything, it can't be exhaustive. It can't really check all your boxes. It's got to check the reader's boxes. So I hope that we did that.
Maybe one of the requests that I have for the second edition of this book might be, maybe you can do this on your website, visible.is or visible.is.
It's Icelandic, actually.
Yeah, it's Icelandic. Yeah,
it's probably an Icelandic accent that needs to be implemented on it.
It's that I think a lot of the concepts that you talk about, if you can figure out somehow a way to condense them and come up with a few retrospective formats, which could be executed in like an hour 15 minutes, which take some of the principles that you talk about and give sort of Scrum Masters a guidebook on how you can actually do that. It's challenging, but I think if anybody's able to do it, it's you. So I think that's your that's my request to you for your next piece of work.
Request granted, Gerard. So we actually have in the supplemental materials. Because I'm very concerned about this as well. I think this is very important that we are able to fit this into the schedule that we already have, right? I don't like the idea of saying block out 4 days and you're gonna, you're gonna dread that because you're just gonna be watching the work pile up behind the scenes, right? So we try to fit all the mapping exercises into 90 minutes, but specifically to your point, that we've gamified or created a game version of an introduction to flow engineering that uses like a fictional prototypical value stream to kind of illustrate the concepts very easily or very quickly and easily. And we've done it in 15 minutes at a couple of different events with rooms of like 50 people who don't even work together. So hopefully request granted already.
Okay,
but I'll send that to you. You let me know.
Okay, I will do. So
and
Steve,
we can put in the show notes.
Okay, so thanks for joining on and giving us an overview of this. I highly recommend the book and also the YouTube talks. Just put Steve's name in YouTube and you'll see a bunch of stuff and you'll get a very good. I know we didn't dive into the actual techniques in this podcast because I think that's already covered in a lot of the other material. So here you just kind of heard from the author himself. So thank you again, Steve, for coming on, and hope to have you back soon enough.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.